What if every choice you've ever made was already woven into a thread before you were born? The ancient Greeks believed in the Moirai, 3 goddesses who spun, measured, and cut the threads of life. But what if it wasn't that simple? What if the fates left room for your will to bend the tapestry? Tonight's story isn't just about destiny. It's about the fragile, terrifying power of the choices we still get to make. If tonight's journey feels right, take a moment to softly click that like button and subscribe. It really helps out my young, growing channel. And please, share in the comments where you're tuning in from and the local time. It's wonderful discovering where everyone is around the globe. Now dim the lights, get cozy, and let's drift off together. Picture a loom where every thread is a person's life. Not just the length of it, but every twist and turn, every joy and sorrow. The ancient Greeks saw destiny this way, not as a straight line, but as a tapestry being woven in real time. The patterns shift as choices are made, but the fabric itself never unravels. This loom stands in a dim, windowless room where the air smells like wool and damp earth. 3 figures move around it in silence. Hesiod describes the Moirai's workshop in Theogony. There's no mention of light, only the sound of spindles turning and shears snapping shut. The threads shimmer faintly, some gold, some coarse and grey. The fates don't look up as they work. Clotho handles the raw material, carding clouds of wool between her fingers, spinning it into something purposeful. The wool comes from no flock mortals have ever seen. Some say it grows in the Garden of Night herself, sprouting from the soil like silver grass. Others claim it's gathered from the breath of newborn children, still warm with possibility. The loom itself has no beginning or end. New threads appear as others are cut, stretching from the ceiling into a pit so deep the bottom can't be seen. The frame groans sometimes, not from the weight of the fabric, but from the tension of millions of stories pulling against each other. A king's thread might fray against a beggar's. Lovers' strands twist together so tightly they share the same color. Lachesis walks the length of the loom with a measuring rod carved from a single bone. She doesn't count years. She measures the texture of a life. Rough patches indicate suffering. Worn spots show repetition. When she finds a section knotted with bad choices, she pauses. The rod isn't a tool for fixing, only for marking. Atropos waits at the far end of the loom. Her scissors aren't made of metal, but of something far older. Obsidian flakes from the first volcano, thunderstone, split by lightning. She tests the blades against her thumb, though they've never needed sharpening. When she cuts, the thread doesn't fall. It's pulled downward into the dark, still twitching like a severed nerve. The Greeks didn't think of fate as a single event, but as a process. Your thread isn't just your death, it's every step that leads you there. The Moirai don't invent the pattern, they interpret it. Even they can't say where the designs come from. Some claim the loom belongs to Ananke, the primordial force of necessity. Others whisper that Nyx, the night, hums the patterns to her daughters in their sleep. When the fates work, they don't speak. The real question isn't how the loom works, but why they let us see the threads at all. In some stories, prophets catch glimpses of the tapestry, a flash of colour, a sudden snag. Their names tell you more than their roles. Clotho means the spinner, but also the twist. Lachesis translates to the drawer of lots, as in the lots cast to divide land. Atropos is the inflexible, but also the unturning. Together, they're not just weavers. They're the architects of every life's texture. The next time you make a choice, try this. Picture the moment stretching out into thread. Feel the spindle tugging it tight. Wonder if it was always meant to be part of the pattern, or if the pattern shifts to meet you. That's the secret of the loom. It doesn't just weave destiny. It weaves around it. The first breath you took wasn't really yours. It belonged to Clotho. She was already there, spinning your thread before your mother felt the first pain of labor. Her spindle whirs in the quiet moments before birth, turning nothing into something. The wool isn't wool at all. It's the raw possibility of who you might become. She doesn't decide your fate yet. She just starts the thread moving. The shaft is polished bone, worn smooth by countless births. The whirl is a slice of pomegranate, dried hard as stone. When she spins, the fibers stick to her fingers like cobwebs. Some threads come easily, others fight her, tangling as if they don't want to be born. The threads that resist often weave the boldest patterns later. Clotho works in darkness, not because she hides, but because beginnings don't need light. She listens for the mother's heartbeat, the baby's first cry. These sounds guide her hands. If the birth is difficult, she might pause. Not out of mercy, but curiosity. She wants to see if the thread will snap on its own. Most don't. Most cling to the spindle like they know what's waiting for them. The Greeks called her the twist for a reason. Every rotation of her spindle adds another layer to your story. One twist might give you a love of music. Another could mean a tendency toward anger. She doesn't choose these things. She just spins what's given to her. The wool comes from somewhere deeper, somewhere even Zeus can't reach. Some say it grows in Nyx's garden, sprouting from cracks in the earth. Others whisper, it's made from the last breaths of the dying, recycled into new beginnings. Birth rituals always included the Moirai. Midwives would leave offerings of honey and wool at crossroads, begging for Clotho's favor. They knew she wasn't gentle. She was fair. If a thread was meant to be short, no amount of honey could lengthen it. But sometimes, sometimes, she'd spin a little extra into the fibers. A resilience, a stubbornness that could outlast suffering. When he was born, the Moirai appeared at his cradle. Clotho spun his thread thick and strong, humming as she worked. Lachesis measured it long, her fingers brushing the fibers approvingly. Then Atropos pointed to a log burning in the hearth. She said he would live until that log turned to ash. His mother snatched the log from the fire, quenching it in water. She hid it in a chest, thinking she'd cheated fate. But logs dry out. They wait. Years later, in a fit of rage, she burned it herself. Meleager died screaming. Clotho knew this would happen. She spun the thread anyway, because beginnings aren't about endings. They're about the spinning. Some mothers claim to see her at births. An old woman crouched in the corner, fingers working tirelessly. She never smiled. She never wept. She just spun. If a baby died during delivery, people said Clotho had dropped her spindle. The thread snapped before it could truly begin. These were the only times she showed emotion. A slight frown, as if puzzled by the waste of good wool. The spindle never stopped turning. Even now, it spins for children being born in hospitals, in huts, in the back seats of speeding cars. Clotho doesn't care about circumstances. Wealth doesn't make the thread smoother. Poverty doesn't make it rougher. Every life starts with the same motion. A twist, a pull, another twist. Here's what no one tells you about the spinning. The thread isn't straight. It curls and kinks from the very beginning. Those imperfections aren't mistakes. They're places where choices will catch later. A fork in the road, a chance meeting, a decision made in haste. The thread remembers these moments before they happen. You might think Lachesis measures your life after it's lived. But that's not true. She starts measuring the moment Clotho finishes spinning. The length is set. The texture isn't. That's where free will comes in, not in changing the thread, but in how you move through it. Clotho's work seems simple. Spin. Twist. Spin. Twist. Release. Next time you make a choice, remember the spindle. Not to frighten you, but to remind you every beginning is sacred. Even the hard ones, especially the hard ones. Because the threads that struggle most against the spindle often shine brightest in the loom. Now imagine Lachesis standing ready with her measuring rod. She doesn't care how your thread began, only how it runs. Lachesis doesn't count years. She measures the weight of them. Her staff isn't marked with numbers, it's carved with symbols too old to read. One notch might mean a decade of peace. Another could signal a single day of war. She runs her fingers along the wood, feeling where the grain tightens. That's how she knows where to pause. The thread isn't just long or short, it's dense with moments. Her staff was never new. The wood comes from the first olive tree that grew on the Acropolis, back when the world was still soft at the edges. The bark left dark streaks where she grips it, stained by centuries of handling mortal threads. When she measures, she doesn't look at the thread itself. She watches the shadows it casts on the floor. Long shadows mean suffering is coming. Short ones mark joyful stretches. That's the trick of measurement. Nothing stays still long enough to pin down. Not because she gives, but because she portions out what's already there. Your share of time was decided before you drew breath. A slave might receive 10 years of unexpected kindness. Lachesis doesn't explain. She just measures. In the myth of Meleager, his mother thought she could cheat the measurement. The fate said he'd live until a burning log turned to ash. She pulled it from the fire, believing she'd saved him. But the log still existed. Lachesis had already measured its slow burn against his thread. The extra years didn't change the amount of life he had, only how it unraveled. When his mother finally burned the log in anger, it wasn't a new death. It was the same one, arriving exactly when it was meant to. Lachesis knows something. Mortals forget. Length doesn't equal weight. A thread can be short, but woven so tight it holds more life than one twice as long. She presses her thumb into the fibers, testing their resistance. That's how she finds the trials. A rough patch might mean illness. A thin spot could signal betrayal. She doesn't cause these things. She just maps where they'll fall. Her staff has another purpose. When a thread threatens to tangle with others, she uses it to separate them. This doesn't always work. Some fates are meant to intertwine. Lovers' threads resist the staff, curling around each other like vines. Enemies' threads snap back when parted, drawn together by their own tension. Lachesis lets them. She understands that struggle shapes the measurement as much as time does. Most think she's emotionless. They're wrong. When she measures a thread destined for greatness, her fingers linger. Not in admiration, but calculation. She's checking the cost. Heroism requires suffering. Happiness demands balance. There are no long threads without thin stretches, no glorious moments without knots. She sees the whole pattern at once, where mortals only feel the tug of the present. But sometimes, if the thread was interesting enough, she'd shift the measurement. Not the length, the distribution. Spread the pain out. Cluster the joy, like adjusting the weight on a scale. The myth of Tithonus shows this. Eos asked for him to live forever, but forgot to ask for eternal youth. Lachesis gave him endless years, but stretched them so thin he withered into a cricket. She didn't cheat. She just measured differently. The measuring isn't continuous. She returns to threads at intervals, checking how they've worn. Some fray faster than expected. Others hold firm against the loom's tension. These checkups aren't about changing fate. They're about confirming it. The thread knows its own path. Her job is to mark the milestones. When she finds a section worn smooth by repeated mistakes, she nods. These are the parts that define you more than the triumphs. The staff isn't her only tool. Sometimes she uses a globe, turning it under the thread like a mirror. The reflection shows what will happen, not what could. Really, they were just seeing the measurement from another angle. The globe doesn't lie, but it doesn't show everything. The spaces between reflections are where free will lives. Lachesis never hurries. She knows something the other sisters don't. Measurement isn't passive. The act of observing changes the thread, not in big ways. A slight tremble here, a tighter twist there. It's why Oracle's predictions sometimes fail. The weight of being watched alters the weave. The final measurement comes without warning. She doesn't announce it. The thread simply stops moving when she lifts her staff. That's how Atropos knows it's time. Your thread has already been measured more times than you know. Lachesis doesn't care if you're ready. She only cares that the numbers add up. The length was set long ago. The texture is still yours to determine. Now imagine Atropos standing at the far end of the loom. Her scissors gleam dully in the half-light. She doesn't need to. The threads come to her in their own time, stretched tight across the loom. Her scissors aren't like ordinary ones. The blades are made of thunderstone, black and jagged, forged in the first storm. They don't gleam. They swallow light. When she tests the edge against her thumb, it leaves no mark. The cut comes only when the thread is ready. Not a moment sooner, not a moment later. Her name means the unturnable. The thread doesn't just fall. It's pulled downward into a place even the gods don't name. Some say it's the underworld. Others claim it's something older. The space where threads go to forget they were ever woven. The scissors never rust. They don't dull. They've cut through kings and beggars with the same ease. Atropos doesn't choose how the threads end. She only severs them where Lachesis last measured. Sometimes the cut comes mid-laugh. Sometimes it arrives after years of suffering. The timing isn't hers to decide. Her role is simply to act when the moment comes. After the cut, the thread doesn't vanish. It lingers for a breath, twitching like a nerve. Then it's drawn away. The soul follows, pulled toward judgment. Elysium for the blessed, the fields of punishment for the wicked, the asphodel meadows for those who were neither. Atropos doesn't watch them go. She's already turning to the next thread. Some myths claim death can be cheated. They're half right. The story of Alcestis shows how it works. When her husband Admetus was fated to die, she took his place. Her thread was cut too soon, but Heracles fought death himself to bring her back. Here's the catch. She wasn't truly alive after, just walking, breathing, a ghost in her own skin. The fates allowed it because the thread had already been severed. What returned wasn't the same as what was lost. Pelops' resurrection was different. The Moirai themselves restored him after his father murdered and served him to the gods. They rebuilt his body, replacing his missing shoulder with ivory. It stayed cold, no matter how close he held his lovers. A reminder that some cuts can't be undone, even by the ones who made them. Orpheus learned this the hard way. His music charmed Hades into releasing Eurydice. When Orpheus looked back too soon, he wasn't just breaking Hades' rule, he was proving theirs. No amount of love could reweave what had been cut. Atropos knows these stories. Exceptions don't disprove the rule. Every bargain leaves marks. The scissors don't judge, they just cut. Her workspace is the quietest part of the loom. No spindle whirs here, no measuring rod taps. Just the soft snick of blades closing. The other sisters don't speak to her much. They don't need to. Atropos ends. The rhythm never changes. Mortals fear her most, but they misunderstand. She isn't death. She's the door. The cut isn't punishment, it's release. Without it, threads would tangle forever, knotted and fraying. The loom would collapse under the weight of unfinished stories. The scissors aren't her only tool. Sometimes she uses a knife made from a whale's tooth, polished smooth by centuries of use. Other times, a sliver of obsidian sharp enough to part the air. The instrument doesn't matter. The result is the same. There's a myth about a man who tried to steal her scissors. He thought if he controlled the cut, he could live forever. Atropos didn't stop him. She just watched as he held the blades to his own thread. Really, they just acknowledge what's already happened. The threads know when their time is near. They grow thin, brittle, easy to part. Atropos doesn't force the moment. She waits for the thread to tell her it's ready. Then she acts. Some claim she's the oldest sister. Others say she's the youngest. The truth is, she's neither. Time doesn't touch her. She exists outside it, a fixed point in the loom's endless weaving. The dead don't haunt her. They can't. Once the cut is made, the thread belongs to someone else. Hades. Anubis. Whoever waits in the dark. Her work is done. Every culture has a version of her. The reaper. The psychopomp. The silent figure at the end. They all circle the same truth. Some doors only open one way. Atropos doesn't smile when she works. She doesn't weep. She simply watches the threads, waiting for the moment they're ready to be freed. Then the blades close. The tension eases. The loom sighs. Next time you fear an ending, remember the scissors. They're not the enemy. The real tragedy isn't the cut. It's the threads that never get woven at all. Now imagine the loom itself, stretching beyond sight. The patterns aren't just individual lives. They're nations rising and falling. Wars beginning and ending. The fates don't just weave people. They weave history. Their origins are as tangled as the threads they weave. Some say they were born from Nyx, the primordial night, her dark hands shaping them before even the gods existed. Others claim Zeus and Themis created them, placing them at the heart of the Olympian order. The stories don't agree, because fate itself resists simple explanations. Hesiod's Theogony gives the oldest version. Here, they emerge from the union of Nyx and Erebus, deities so ancient they make the Titans seem young. This lineage makes sense, night and darkness birthing the force that governs all endings. Their sisters in this version are dire. Death, dreams, misery, company that reveals their true nature. They weren't meant to be kind, just inevitable. But in other tales, their parentage shifts. Zeus and Themis, goddess of divine law, become their creators. This changes everything. Now they're not primal forces, but instruments of order. Themis oversees cosmic justice, and her daughters execute it. The loom becomes less a web of chaos, and more a structured tapestry. Here, fate aligns with Zeus's rule rather than predating it. The contradiction isn't accidental. It shows how even the Greeks wrestled with the idea of destiny. Was it older than the gods, or subject to them? Regional myths add more threads to the tangle. Crete whispered they were Chaos's daughters, formed from the void itself. These variations matter. Coastal towns saw fate as fluid, shifting like tides. Mountain villages viewed it as unyielding as stone. The fates adapted to how people needed to understand them. Ananke's shadow looms over all versions, the personification of necessity. She's older than Nyx, more absolute than Zeus, but there's terror too. Ananke doesn't compromise. No amount of prayer changes what's necessary. Their birthplace shifts with the teller. Sometimes it's a cave at the edge of night where no light reaches. Other accounts place them beneath the roots of the world tree where time drips like sap. A few late myths claim they dwell in Olympus, though this feels wrong. They don't belong with the petty squabbles of gods. Their home is wherever threads run thickest, the space between breaths, the hush before a last heartbeat. Their names hold clues. Clotho's means spinner, but also twist, the moment when thread turns back on itself. Lachesis derives from lot, as in the casting of lots to divide land. Atropos translates to unyielding, but also the unturning. Together, these names sketch a process, creation, distribution, irrevocable end. The syllables feel old, older than Greek, as if borrowed from a language the earth spoke before humans came. Hyginus adds another layer. He claims they invented 7 Greek letters, gifting mortals the tools to record their own stories. This changes them from weavers to teachers. The first alphabets weren't just symbols. They were spells thin enough to fit on parchment. If true, it means every written word echoes their spindle's twist. Your reading this now might be part of their pattern. The contradictions serve a purpose. A fate born of night is different from one sired by Zeus. The first brings inevitable darkness. The second offers the slim hope that fate might heed divine justice. By keeping their origins unclear, the myths let them be both, absolute yet adjustable, fixed yet responsive. Their parentage shifts because destiny itself isn't one thing. For a child being born, it's the promise of a mother's arms. For a soldier marching to war, it's the arrow already loosed. Both truths coexist. Their birth isn't a single event. It's ongoing. Every new thread adds to them. Every cut pares something away. They're as old as the first life and as young as the last. This might explain why their origins conflict, not to hide their faces, but because some truths don't need eyes. Their hands are enough. Clotho's fingers dusty with wool fibers, Lachesis' palms marked by the staff's impressions, Atropos' grip slick from the shear's handle. Touch tells their story better than sight ever could. Now picture them at their loom, wherever it stands. The patterns emerging aren't just lives, they're the rise of cities, the fall of empires, the slow arcs of history. Their work encompasses more than individual threads. It's the weave of existence itself. This scale explains why their origins matter. If born from chaos, then fate is random. If sprung from order, it's purposeful. The myths let you choose which truth comforts you, or which one terrifies. What stays constant is their presence. Their scissors cut through Titan and Olympian alike. The thread doesn't care who holds it, only that it's held. Their true birthplace isn't a cave or mountaintop. It's the moment you realize some things can't be changed. That's where they live, in the pause before acceptance, the breath after denial, the quiet when resistance fades. We'll never know where they came from. Maybe that's the point. Origins are for things that begin. The fates don't begin. Zeus could hurl thunderbolts that shook mountains, but even he couldn't change what the Moirai had woven. That's the secret no one tells you about being king of the gods. Some things even he had to accept. They simply turned their spindle, lifted their measuring rod, and closed their shears. The pattern continued regardless. Their relationship wasn't one of ruler and subject, but of uneasy equals. Zeus might sit atop Olympus, but the Moirai operated in the spaces between his power. When he wanted to save a mortal he favored, he didn't command the sisters. He looked for loopholes, a clever interpretation of their weaving, a moment where the thread might bend without breaking. The story of Sarpedon shows this tension perfectly. Zeus knew his son was fated to die at Troy. He couldn't stop it, but he made the battle stop long enough to let Apollo whisk the body away for proper burial, not changing fate, just rearranging its aftermath. This balance of power shows up in unexpected places. The gods could nudge events, but never overturn the final pattern. When Apollo tried to extend Admetus's life, even he had to find someone willing to die in the king's place. The fates allowed the exchange, but the scales had to balance. No free gifts, nothing unearned. Even divine favor operated within their rules. The limits become clearer when you see what the gods couldn't do. Hades couldn't refuse a soul whose thread had been cut. Athena couldn't grant Odysseus a painless homecoming, only a survivable one. Dionysus couldn't save his mortal friends from old age. Immortality had its borders, and the Moirai marked them. They weren't just weaving mortal lives. They defined the edges of what gods could influence. There's a reason the sisters worked in darkness. Not to hide, but because light implies the possibility of clarity. The gods preferred their workings, visible temples, oracles, thunderstorms. The Moirai's power stayed in the shadows where even divine sight strained. When Zeus sent Hermes to spy on them, the messenger god returned with his silver sandals full of loose threads. They hadn't stopped him. They'd just let him leave with the wrong information. Some myths suggest Apollo held partial influence over human destiny as the god of prophecy. But even this was limited. He could see the threads, perhaps even suggest slight variations in their tension. But the shears still fell where they pleased. The Pythia at Delphi might give cryptic warnings, but she never promised safety, only knowledge. The fates allowed foresight, but never interference. Their independence shaped Olympus more than the gods liked to admit. Every divine plan had to account for the unbreakable threads. Aphrodite's love curses couldn't override chosen destinies. Ares' war frenzy still bowed to battlefield fates. Even Poseidon, raging against Odysseus, couldn't drown a man whose thread hadn't been measured to end that way. The sea might churn, storms might rage, but the loom's rhythm continued undisturbed. The hierarchy reveals itself in quiet moments. Zeus never directly challenged the Moirai. When confronted with their decrees, he didn't thunder or threaten. He bargained. He negotiated. He looked for the spaces between their rulings. This wasn't weakness. This dynamic might explain the conflicting stories of their parentage. If they were daughters of Nyx, they predated and surpassed the Olympians. If born of Zeus and Themis, they became instruments of his order. Both versions contain truth. The Moirai worked with the gods, but not for them. They enforced a system larger than any pantheon. You can see this in how the gods treated them. No temples were built to the fates. No hymns celebrated their mercy. Mortals left quiet offerings at crossroads, but the Olympians kept their distance. Not out of fear, exactly. More like the respect one shows a sharp blade. Useful. Best left undisturbed. When the threads tangled beyond repair, when even the sisters hesitated. Ananke's whisper settled the matter. This suggests the Moirai weren't entirely free either. They followed a deeper order, one that even they couldn't name. Their power over gods wasn't absolute, but it was inescapable. Like a river's current, you might swim against it for a while, but eventually it carries you where it's going. The Olympians had eternity. The Moirai decided what forever meant. That's why the stories where gods challenge fate are so revealing. In every case, the effort fails or backfires. Thetis dips Achilles in the Styx, but his heel remains untouched. The thread was always meant to snap there. No amount of divine intervention could change the cut's location, only its timing. This balance persists in modern retellings. When Disney's Hercules tries to defy the fates, he doesn't defeat them. He finds a loophole in their own rules. Even our contemporary stories can't imagine truly overcoming them, only working within their design. The lesson isn't that gods are weak. It's that some forces govern everything, even those who seem to govern us. The Moirai didn't control Olympus. They defined its boundaries, not with threats or battles, but with something far more unshakable. The quiet certainty of the loom's rhythm. Now consider Alcestis, the queen who chose to die for her husband. Now consider Alcestis, the queen who chose to die for her husband. That was the thread measured for him. But Apollo had a soft spot for the mortal king. Perhaps because Admetus had once shown him kindness during the god's year of servitude. So the archer god did something unthinkable. He went to the Moirai and bargained, not to break the rules, but to bend them. If someone would willingly take Admetus's place, the thread could be cut differently. The words willingly mattered. The fates wouldn't accept a sacrifice made by force. At first, it seemed easy. Admetus asked his elderly parents to die for him. They refused. Why should they? Their own threads still had length. Friends turned away when he approached. Servants found urgent business elsewhere. Only Alcestis, his wife, stepped forward. Her thread wasn't nearly done. They had children, years ahead of them. But she chose to go, not because someone forced her, but because love made the choice inevitable. The Moirai accepted this. She washed, dressed in white, and said goodbye to her children. Her hands shook just slightly as she tied the last ribbon. That's how Euripides describes it. Not with grand speeches, but with quiet details. The way she paused at the threshold, how the sunlight caught the edge of her veil. She didn't argue with the fates. She simply walked toward them. The god of death doesn't usually collect souls himself. That's Hermes' job. But this was special. A voluntary death required witness. He stood in the corner of the room, his wings folded tight, watching as Alcestis's breath slowed. The scissors cut. The thread ended. Except Admetus, though grieving, honored the laws of guest friendship. He served wine, ordered a feast, said nothing about the fresh tomb outside. Heracles drank deeply, oblivious. When servants finally whispered the truth, he did what heroes do. He marched down to the underworld and wrestled Alcestis back. Not through trickery or pleas, just raw strength. Sometimes fate yields to those who push hardest. Here's where the story gets strange. Alcestis returns, but she's silent for 3 days. Euripides never explains why. Some think she'd seen too much to speak. Others believe the fates demanded this price. Her voice in exchange for more time. The truth is simpler. The Moirai allowed the return, but they marked it. Alcestis came back changed. Not unhappy, exactly. Just aware in a way she hadn't been before. She'd felt the scissors. That stays with you. Other myths play with similar bargains. Orpheus almost retrieved Eurydice. but he looked back too soon. Sisyphus tricked death twice, first by chaining Thanatos, then by persuading Persephone to let him return to life. Both times, the fates reclaimed him. The difference with Alcestis is that her return stuck. Perhaps because she hadn't cheated. She'd paid. Apollo's initial deal mattered. The thread had been cut, cleanly, according to the rules. What happened afterward was separate. The fates don't care about resurrection. They only govern the first death. The Moirai don't protest Heracles' actions. There's a quiet understanding that some bargains can stand, provided the terms are met exactly. Apollo knew this when he made the deal centuries earlier. He'd been raised by Themis herself. He understood how to phrase things. Modern readers often miss the point. They focus on the rescue, not the sacrifice. But Alcestis's power wasn't in returning. It was in leaving in the first place. The Moirai respect action. They can measure it. Interestingly, the play never shows Alcestis speaking after her return. Her silence lingers like an unanswered question. Perhaps Euripides meant to suggest that some things transcend words. You live differently afterward. Other cultures have similar stories. In Norse mythology, Baldur's mother gets almost every being in creation to weep for him, hoping to bring him back from hell. She misses one. A giantess who may actually be Loki in disguise. The near success makes the failure more bitter. The Greeks went the other way. Alcestis fails at first, then succeeds through Heracles' strength. Two approaches to cheating death, one through universal agreement, the other through force. Guess which fits the Greek worldview better? The fates didn't mind Heracles' interference because he didn't challenge their authority. He worked within the existing weave. Apollo's original deal left that possibility open. Clever wording creates flexibility, even with destiny. Admetus grew old eventually. His second death wasn't recorded, probably because it didn't matter as much. The first death shapes a life. The second just confirms it. The Moirai probably measured his thread again, cut it without ceremony. The story had moved on. What remains is the pattern, offer, acceptance, consequences. Not every bargain changes fate. Now consider the objects the sisters use daily. Simple things, spindle, rod, shears. But each carries weight beyond its form. Clotho's spindle isn't just a tool, it's the first breath-given shape. The shaft is polished bone, smoothed by countless rotations. The whorl is carved from pomegranate wood, its surface stained dark from handling. When she spins, the fibers stick to her fingers like cobwebs. They say the wool comes from Nyx's garden, sprouting between cracks in the earth. Others claim it's gathered from the last sighs of the dying, recycled into new beginnings. The spindle doesn't just create thread. It defines how that thread will behave, whether it will stretch taut or fray easily. The twist of the fibers determines resilience. A loose spin might mean a life prone to unraveling. A tight twist could signal stubbornness. The wood comes from the first olive tree on the Acropolis, its grains still visible beneath the stains of countless handled threads. She doesn't count years. She weighs them. When the staff presses into a thread, it leaves faint impressions. Barely visible dents where suffering will occur, smooth patches where joy pools. The staff isn't a ruler. It's a scale. One end tips toward birth. The other leans toward death. The balance point shifts with every decision made, though the total weight never changes. Sometimes the staff hovers over a thread for a long time, as if listening. The blades are black volcanic glass, cooled too quickly to form crystals. They never need sharpening because they don't work by slicing. The moment a thread is ready, the shears simply part. The fibers don't resist. They almost seem to lean into the separation. After the cut, the blades stay clean. No remnants cling to them. That's how you know the stories of heroes trying to steal them are lies. The shears can't be wielded by anyone else. They're not tools in the usual sense. They're more like a door that only opens one way. The objects gain power from what they don't do. Clotho's spindle never tangles, no matter how wild the wool. Lachesis' staff never breaks, even when measuring threads heavy with tragedy. Atropos' shears never hesitate, even when the thread belongs to a child. The consistency matters. It's how the fates maintain order. If the tools behaved unpredictably, destiny would unravel. There's a reason these objects appear simple. A spindle is just wood and weight. A staff is a carved branch. Shears achemachia. But their simplicity is deceptive. The spindle controls beginnings without determining them. The staff measures without judging. The shears end without cruelty. Each tool does exactly one thing perfectly. Nothing more. In others, it's dull as old rope. When pulled taut, it hums. The tone varies. Some threads sing high and clear. Others vibrate low enough to shake the loom. They said it was Clotho testing the thread's pitch. Lachesis uses her staff like a musician uses a tuning fork. When she taps it against the loom's frame, the vibration travels through every connected thread. How they respond tells her what adjustments are needed. A thread that rings too long might need more weight. One that falls silent too quickly could be strengthened. She doesn't alter fate. She tunes it. Atropos' shears make no sound when they close, but the threads do. The moment before separation, each one lets out a soft exhale, like someone releasing a breath they didn't know they were holding. The strands never fight the cut. They simply divide. This is why the shears can't be stolen or misused. They don't function without that quiet surrender. The tools work together in precise sequence. Spin, measure, cut, but sometimes, rarely, the order changes. A thread might bypass the spindle entirely, appearing fully formed on the loom. Others avoid the staff's measurement, stretching farther than any mortal lifespan should allow. Atropos still cuts them eventually, but the delay is noticeable. Then there are the vanished threads, the ones that disappear from the loom without being cut. No one knows where they go, not even the fates. What's clear is that the tools don't control the threads. The threads control the tools. The spindle turns because the wool wants to be spun. The staff lifts because the thread demands measurement. The shears close because the fibers are ready to part. The Moirai aren't weavers so much as conduits. Their hands follow where the threads lead. Now consider how often these objects appear in modern metaphors. We still talk about spinning lies, measuring our days, cutting ties. The language of fate lingers because the tools shaped how we think about time. A clock is just a mechanical staff. Genetic code is an elaborate spindle. Every final curtain echoes Atropos' shears. The next time you make a major choice, picture the loom. Not to frighten you, but to remind you. The tools are simple. The weaving is complex. The patterns emerge from how threads interact, not from the spindle's turn or the shear's cut. What happens between beginning and end? That's where the real work happens. Now imagine stepping back to see the whole loom. The threads aren't individual anymore. They form constellations. Cities rise and fall in the negative space between them. The tools haven't changed, but the scale has. The fates weren't just measuring lives, they were mapping civilization. The moment you were born, the Moirai were already there, not as watchers, but as workers. Lachesis adjusted her measuring rod. Your thread had been spun, but now it needed placement in the larger tapestry. Ancient Greek midwives knew this. They left offerings of honey and wool at crossroads before deliveries, not to beg for mercy, but to acknowledge the process. The honey sweetened Clotho's fingers so the thread wouldn't stick. The wool reminded Lachesis to measure generously. They didn't need to. The thread's texture spoke for itself. A thick, tightly spun cord might mean a long life, but also one weighed down with responsibility. A thin strand could signal brevity, or perhaps a lightness of being. The midwives would examine the newborn's hands, looking for lines that mirrored the loom's patterns. A deep lifeline didn't guarantee length, just density. Some short threads held more living than long ones. Naming ceremonies carried special weight. The act of giving a name was like tying a knot in the thread, a marker the fates would recognize. Names weren't just labels. They were points where the weave could be adjusted. A child named after a hero might inherit some of that hero's thread patterns. One named for a grandparent could pick up strands of their unfinished business. The Moirai noticed these choices. They didn't always honor them, but they noticed. Meleager's story shows how birth assignments worked. When he was born, the Moirai didn't just appear, they spoke. They pointed to a burning log and tied his life to its consumption. His mother thought she could cheat the system by saving the log, but the assignment had already been made. The length was set. The manner was set. All that remained was the unfolding. Not every birth got such clear signs. Most threads were assigned quietly, with only small markers. A baby born with a caul might have a particularly twisty thread, prone to unexpected turns. One who came feet first could have a strand that resisted the loom's tension, always pushing against the weave. These weren't prophecies. They were characteristics, like the way wool takes dye differently depending on how it's spun. The assignments continued after birth. On the 7th day, families would hold a feast called the Amphidromia. The baby would be carried around the hearth, symbolically introduced to the household gods. This was another moment the fates noted. The hearth's fire reflected how the thread would burn, steady and warm, or quick and bright. The order in which guests held the child might influence future alliances, weaving their threads closer together. Some cities took this further. In Sparta, elders examined newborns for physical flaws. Those deemed unfit were left on Mount Taygetos. Harsh as it seems, the Spartans believed they were helping the Moirai, removing weak threads before they could tangle the greater tapestry. Other Greeks found this abhorrent. Thebans claimed even the frailest thread had purpose, if only to make others stronger by contrast. The assignments weren't just personal. Cities had threads too, spun from the collective lives of their citizens. When a new colony was founded, priests would perform rituals mirroring birth ceremonies, offering honey, wrapping wool around boundary stones. The fates would assign the city's thread a place in the loom, crossing it with others in patterns of trade and war. No one wondered if this was fair. The loom didn't care about fairness. It cared about balance. The oddest assignments went to those born at liminal times. Twilight, midnight, the cusp of seasons. Their threads often shimmered oddly, catching light when others lay flat. These individuals might become poets, prophets, or madmen. The Moirai didn't explain why. They just spun what the moment gave them. Modern genetics would have made sense to the ancient Greeks. They understood that birth carries forward patterns. A child might inherit their father's weak eyes, or their mother's strong hands. The fates simply extended this to the unseen fabric of life. Your thread wasn't just your own, it was a continuation. This explains why abandoned children feature so often in myths. Oedipus, Paris, Romulus all had their threads reassigned when left to die. The original assignments didn't disappear. They just bent to accommodate new circumstances. The fates allowed for adjustments, so long as the overall pattern held. What's startling is how little say parents had. A king couldn't demand a golden thread for his heir. A slave's child might receive strands finer than a noble's. The assignments followed rules no mortal could discern. That uncertainty bred both terror and comfort. Terror because control was an illusion. Comfort because even the mightiest couldn't cheat the system. The loom's scale puts this in perspective. From a distance, individual threads blur into larger designs. Cities rise and fall in the negative spaces between them. The fates didn't just assign lives. They composed history. Now picture the loom expanding further. Past cities to nations, past nations to civilizations. The birth assignments never stop. They just shift scale. Every beginning, no matter how small, gets its thread. Every ending, no matter how grand, meets the shears. The pattern continues. Always. The gods didn't choose their domains. After the Titans fell and the Olympians took power, someone had to decide who ruled what. Zeus got the sky. Poseidon claimed the sea. Hades received the underworld, but these weren't prizes won in battle. They were portions measured out by the fates, cut carefully from the cosmic fabric. The division wasn't random. Each piece had to balance the others, keeping the world from tearing apart at the seams. When the island of Rhodes rose from the sea, freshly birthed by the waters, Zeus didn't simply give it to his son Helios. First, he had Lachesis swear an oath that the land belonged to the sun god. The measuring rod didn't just set lifespans, it marked territories too. Poseidon received Kos the same way. The island's boundaries determined by how far Lachesis' staff could reach in one sweep. Even the gods needed their realms measured properly, or the whole system would collapse. Their declarations carried more weight than Zeus's thunderbolts. At Apollo's birth in Delos, the Moirai attended not just to spin his thread, but to declare his privileges: archery, music, prophecy. For Artemis, they ordained her role as guardian of childbirth and the hunt. Athena's eternal virginity came straight from Clotho's mouth. No Olympian argued with these assignments. The fates didn't issue commands. They simply stated what would be, in tones that left no room for debate. The Titanomachy showed what happened when immortals ignored the weaving. During the war, the Titans tried to bribe the fates into siding against Zeus. The Moirai refused. Instead, they warned the Olympians about a prophecy. If the Titans sacrificed a certain bull, its burning entrails would doom Zeus's forces. With this knowledge, the Olympians won, not because they were stronger, but because the fates had chosen their victory. The loom required balance. The Titans' chaos threatened the pattern. The fates intervened not to help Zeus, but to preserve the structure they'd built. Even divine births followed their loom's logic. When Themis, goddess of divine law, lay with Zeus, the Moirai brought the Horai into being, the goddesses of the seasons. Each sister represented a different aspect of time's cycle: order, justice, peace. They weren't just born. They were placed, like carefully knotted threads that would keep the year's fabric from unraveling. The fates attended these births, not as midwives, but as architects checking their blueprints. This organization extended beyond geography and roles. The gods' very natures were shaped at the loom. Dionysus's madness Hera's jealousy, Aphrodite's allure. None were accidents. Without Ares's violence, Athena's strategy would grow stagnant. Without Demeter's grief, the seasons wouldn't turn. Each thread tensioned the others into harmony. Mortals often wonder why the gods didn't overthrow their three quiet sisters. When dividing privileges, the fates gave Poseidon the sea, but kept control of sailing itself. No vessel moves without some thread of destiny guiding it. They allowed Hephaestus metalworking, but reserved the right to decide which swords found hearts. Apollo got prophecies, yet the Moirai determined which came true. Like master craftsmen, they delegated the work, but kept the patterns. Nor did their oversight stop at Olympus. Hades might rule the underworld, but the fates decided who arrived at his gates. Cerberus could guard the dead, but Atropos' shears still determined when they crossed the river. The system covered everything, from the highest peak to the deepest underworld trench. Nothing escaped the weaving, because the weaving was existence itself. Their structure explains why prophecies were always conditional. The oracle at Delphi might say a king would fall, but never specified which war or which son would kill him. That flexibility wasn't uncertainty. It was the fates allowing the threads room to breathe. Even in the divine order, some variation was necessary. Too much rigidity would snap the whole design. Modern minds might call this bureaucracy, but that misses the point. The Moirai weren't administrators. They were the reason administration existed. When Zeus partitioned the world, when gods swore oaths over domains, they were following a pattern woven long before Olympus's first pillar was raised. The fates didn't serve the system. They were the system. Now picture the loom expanding further past gods, past titans, into something more fundamental. The threads stretch beyond myth, into the way cities rise and fall, how civilizations remember their dead, why some stories endure while others fade. The divine order was just their first project. The human one came next. The human one came next. What the fates built wasn't just hierarchy. It was a language, the kind where sea storms argue with sunbeams, where love letters are written in sword strokes, where every choice is a syllable in an epic that never ends. Now imagine speaking that language yourself, not as a god or a king, but as one thread among billions, each sounding its own quiet note in the pattern. The Greeks had two words for fate that sound almost the same but mean completely different things. Meros was your share. The portion of life allotted to you, like someone handing you a measured cup of grain. Moros was your doom. The inevitable end waiting in that portion. One word described what you received. The other warned what would come. Together, they framed how the ancients saw destiny, not as one crushing force, but as a balance between gift and consequence. Take a meal in Homer's time. When food was divided, each person got their myros, their fair portion based on status and need. A king might receive more wine, a soldier extra meat, a slave just enough bread to keep working. This wasn't random. It reflected the natural order. The Moirai did the same with lifetimes, measuring out days like cups of grain. But unlike a meal where you could refuse your portion, fate's share couldn't be handed back. You ate what you were given, even if it tasted bitter. Now consider moros, not punishment, just the fulfillment of what was always coming. The cruel twist is that moros often struck when people reached the end of their meros. Your portion ran out, so your doom arrived, like a water clock emptying its last drop. The difference shows in how the words were used. Kings boasted about their generous Meros long reigns, rich harvests, many children. They didn't mention Moros until it grabbed them by the ankle. Achilles knew he had two possible Moirai, a short, glorious life, or a long, forgotten one. His Moros was fixed either way. Death waits for both options, but the portion could change shape. That's why his choice mattered. Not because it avoided fate, but because it flavored it. Linguistically, Meros was active. It appeared in contexts of distribution and choice. Gods allotted Meros to cities during founding rituals. Families divided inheritances using the same term. Moros was passive. Things happened. Moros was passive. Doom was the date stamped on it. Like a steward ensuring every guest gets their fair meal, even if that meal ends with poison. Homer's Iliad shows the tension between the terms. When Zeus weighs fates, he isn't changing Moros. He's adjusting how Miros gets distributed. Saving a favorite warrior might mean shortening someone else's portion. The balance remains. It smelled like olive oil and felt like warm bread. Moros tasted of iron and seaweed. The words anchored fate in bodily experience because that's where destiny played out, in aching muscles, aging skin, last breaths. The fates didn't deal in ideas. They worked with materials. The division rituals prove this. When colonists drew lots for land, they called each plot a Meros. But the drawing happened at an altar stained with sacrifice, acknowledging the Moros underneath. Every beginning carried its end. Every gift came with a receipt. Even the gods followed this logic. Apollo's Meros included music and prophecy. His Moros included watching Cassandra's prophecies go ignored. Artemis got the hunt, but also eternal virginity, a portion that became a cage. The system wasn't just for humans, it bound everything. The terms still echo today. When we talk about someone getting their due, that's Meros thinking. When we say, it was meant to be, that's Moros speaking. The difference lies in attitude. Accepting your portion feels fair. Facing your doom feels fatalistic. The Greeks held both thoughts at once. Philosophically, Meros allowed for gratitude. Moros required courage. Together, they framed existence as both gift and test. Your share might be small, but how you carried it mattered. Your doom might be fixed, but when you met, it changed everything. Some threads were silk, others were burlap. The loom didn't care about fairness, only pattern. That's why the words mattered. They let humans discuss destiny without claiming to understand it. Now picture standing before the Moirai's loom. Your Moros is the empty space where the thread runs out. The tension between them is what we call living. Neither can exist without the other. The portion needs the doom to give it weight. The doom needs the portion to make it meaningful. This changes how we read the myths. Heracles wasn't justifying Moros with his labors. He was expanding his Meros through action. Odysseus didn't escape his doom. He stretched his portion so thin it became a lifeline. The heroism wasn't in beating fate. It was in moving through it like water, finding pockets of air where others saw only depth. The terms finally converge at death. What was given Meros meets what was promised. Modern genetics might call Meros nature and Moros mortality. Investors could compare them to assets and expiration dates, but the Greek genius was keeping them together, not as opponents, but as partners in the dance. Your portion is the music. Your doom is the last note. How you move between them, writes the song. Now imagine Lachesis pausing mid-measurement. The staff hovers. For once, Meros and Moros wait, not for destiny, for you. Can the fates restore what they take? His father Tantalus cooked him and served him to the gods at a feast. The Moirai could have let him stay dead. Instead, they reached into the stew pot and put him back together. Not perfectly. His missing shoulder got replaced with ivory, cold to the touch, no matter how worn the room. They didn't just bring him back, they marked him. The ivory shoulder matters. It wasn't a flaw. It was a receipt, proof that even the fate's decisions could be rewritten, but not without cost. Pelops would spend his life sensing its weight, both burden and blessing. When he ran, one side stayed cool while the other sweated. When lovers touched him, the hands recoiled slightly at the unnatural smoothness. The Moirai didn't do perfect repairs, just functional ones. His resurrection wasn't a kindness, it was a correction. The gods had tasted human flesh, which broke divine law. Pelops had to return because the balance demanded it. His second chance wasn't about his worth. It was about the loom's pattern needing adjustment. The fates could reweave, but only when the tapestry itself was threatened. The process left signs. These weren't supernatural gifts. They were seams showing where the threads had been retied. Alcestis came back from Hades, but through Heracles' brute strength, not the fates' needlework. Eurydice almost returned, but looked back too soon. Pelops stands alone, not rescued from death, but rethreaded into existence. His story proves that even Atropos' cut isn't always final. Some threads get spliced back in. The ivory tells another truth. The shoulder was a gift from Demeter, who'd been distracted during the cannibal feast and eaten that piece. Even gods make mistakes. The fates allowed the repair, but made sure everyone remembered the error. That's why they chose ivory durable, valuable, but unmistakably foreign. No one would forget this fix. Modern science would call this a non-original equipment replacement. Pelops' descendants would point to ivory figurines and say, "That's like grandfather's shoulder." The mark passed through generations as both warning and wonder. Resurrections like this are rare because they destabilize the loom. If threads can be reattached casually, the whole tapestry risks unraveling. His second chance came with conditions. The fates didn't just drop him back into his old life. They sent him away to grow up in exile. The resurrected don't get to pick up where they left off. There's always recalibration, a debt to pay, a path to walk differently this time. Pelops would eventually return home, win a kingdom through a rigged chariot race, and father a line of kings. But first, he had to carry that cool white shoulder through years of wandering. Lachesis doesn't remark his days. Atropos certainly doesn't uncut anything. Instead, there's a quiet realignment, as if the sisters simply agreed to look the other way for a moment, while Hermes stitched the pieces back together. This flexibility reveals their priorities. The Moirai care more about the overall weave than any single thread. Pelops had to return because his absence left a hole in the grand design. His ivory mark showed others that the system could bend, but never break. Later stories would misinterpret this. Some claimed the gods restored Pelops out of love. Others said his beauty moved them to pity. The truth was colder. He was a necessary correction, like replacing a snapped string on a lyre so the music could continue. The shoulder became his defining feature, not because it was strange, but because it represented a deeper strangeness. Someone who'd been processed through death's machinery and ejected out the other side. His muscles still worked, his blood still flowed, but part of him would always belong to that moment when the fates paused their work. Other cultures have similar stories. Osiris reassembled with a missing piece, Jesus showing his wounds after resurrection. But only in the Greek version does the imperfection become proof not of weakness, but of the system's self-correction. The ivory wasn't a flaw. It was the receipt stamped "returned" by cosmic clerks. His survival reshaped destiny. The grandsons of his ivory shoulder would include Agamemnon and Menelaus, makers of war and unmakers of Troy. One repaired thread rewrote history. The Moirai knew this would happen. They allowed it not because they favored Pelops, but because the tapestry needed those particular knots. The lesson isn't that death can be beaten, is that some patterns matter more than others. The loom tolerates mended threads only when the overall design requires them. Now picture your own scars. Not the physical ones, but the times life should have ended and didn't. Those aren't accidents. They're your ivory joints, the places where the loom adjusted for unseen necessities. Not all second chances feel like gifts. Some arrive cold and smooth, reminding you that survival isn't about worthiness, but about pattern maintenance. The fates never explain their repairs, they simply let the results speak. Pelops rode, ruled, and reproduced. The shoulder worked. The Moirai dealt in functionality. His myth ends where free will begins, with a man walking forward into a life he wasn't supposed to have, carrying marks no one could ignore. The ivory wasn't just a reminder of what he'd lost. It was proof of what he'd been given, not a perfect ending, but an ongoing story. The cut had been reversed. The shears would wait. For now, when someone breaks the natural order, murder, oath-breaking, disrespect to elders, their wit cracks not out of anger, but correction. They share blood with the Moirai, both born from Nyx's darkness. One sisterhood weaves the pattern, the other mends its tears. Aeschylus called them siblings for a reason. The fates spin the thread, measure its length, make the final cut. The Furies follow behind, picking up loose strands, snipping away anything that threatens the weave. They work the same loom from different angles. Clotho's spindle turns, and the Erinyes make sure no one knocks it over. It's not vengeance, it's maintenance. They look similar too. Both have wiry hands, one set for spinning, the other for grasping. Their eyes don't glitter. They absorb light, like old cloth soaking up dye. You wouldn't mistake them for one another, but you'd know they're related. Cosmic justice works through them both. When Orestes killed his mother Clytemnestra, the Moirai didn't intervene. They didn't have to. His thread was always meant to include this moment. Their screaming, their snake whips, their relentless chase. These weren't punishments. They were the pattern tightening. A stitch coming undone, being pulled back into place. The Erinyes ensure they reach that ending. When Atreus fed his brother's children to him, the Furies didn't act immediately. They waited until his thread reached the predetermined unraveling point. Then they descended, not because they chose to, because the moment required it. Underworld myths reveal more. Both sisterhoods dwell in Hades, but on different levels. The Moirai work near the throne room, measuring incoming souls. The Erinyes haunt the torture chambers. Yet they share meals sometimes. Cups of thick wine passed between them in the gloom. They don't need to. The work continues regardless. Oaths make their partnership clearest. When two people swore on the sticks, the Moirai noted the promise in the weave. If someone broke it, the Erinyes enforced consequence. Not out of moral outrage, because the broken oath left a gap in the pattern. Their whip stitched it closed again. The pain they inflicted wasn't cruelty. It was threading a needle. Some say they carry shears like Atropos. Not to cut threads, but to trim loose ends. remnants of lives that ended messily, leaving behind unresolved business. A murdered man's final curse. A betrayed woman's last wish. The Furies collect these frayed bits, presenting them for the Moirai to reweave elsewhere. Nothing gets wasted. Nothing stays unfinished, but their goal is identical: keep the fabric intact. When Agamemnon sacrificed Iphigenia, the Moirai recorded the act in their threads. The Erinyes later punished Clytemnestra for avenging it, then punished Orestes for avenging her, not because they cared about justice, because each act had to be answered to maintain balance. One tear leads to another unless someone sews it shut. Physical descriptions overlap. The Moirai's fingers are stained with dye from handling threads. The Erinyes' nails are blackened from digging through ashes. Both move deliberately, never rushing. They don't need to. The work will be there waiting. The system isn't fair. It's consistent. When the Fates measured Oedipus's thread, they included the parricide and incest. The Furies didn't care that he acted unknowingly. The pattern had to hold. Their torches didn't light his path to redemption. They illuminated the holes he'd torn in Destiny's cloth. The whips stitched him back into place. Modern law separates justice from fate. The Greeks knew better. Every trial was a realignment. Every punishment repaired the cosmic fabric. The Erinyes weren't executioners. They were weavers, working the dark side of the loom. Their kinship explains why the Moirai never intervene in the Furies' work. They don't stop the torment of Orestes or the haunting of Alcmaeon. These aren't interruptions. They're part of the original design. The sisters share more than parentage. They share a function. One charts the course, the other keeps it on track. People feared the Erinyes more, but that's misunderstanding their role. The Moirai decide your suffering. The Furies simply deliver it. Neither enjoys the work, neither shirks it. Knight's daughters don't have that luxury. The collaboration continues today. Whenever justice feels inevitable, when criminals fall into traps of their own making, when tyrants meet fitting ends, that's not coincidence. It's the loom correcting itself, the shears making space, the whip pulling threads tight. Now picture the underworld's weaving room. The Moirai at one end, hands moving steadily. The Erinyes at the other, fingers darting to catch snags. Between them stretches the tapestry, forever repairing itself. Forever repairing itself. The patterns aren't always pretty. They're always complete. This changes how we view punishment, not as retribution, but as reweaving. When the Furies hound a murderer, they're not avenging the victim. They're rebalancing the scale, the Moirai set tilting. The scream of their whip is the sound of a stitch pulling taut. The seasons know this rhythm too. Snow covers floors. Rain washes away loose ends. Growth follows decay as surely as the Furies follow the Fates. The cycle doesn't care about fairness, only continuation. Now imagine standing between these sisterhoods. Your thread stretches to the Moirai's spindle. Your actions echo toward the Furies' whip. The space between isn't freedom, it's the place where pattern and consequence meet. Step carefully. The Horai goddesses of seasons and hours knew this better than anyone. Watch how they move, not in straight lines, but in circles. Flowers bloom, wither, then bloom again. Crops grow, get harvested, then grow once more. The Fates understood this rhythm. That's why they worked alongside the Horai. One sisterhood wove the threads, the other turned the wheel they spun on. Picture a field after harvest. Stalks cut down, soil left bare, Persephone descending to the underworld doesn't end life. It redistributes it. The fates measure her time below just as they measure ours. 6 months ordered by Atropos' shears, 6 more gifted by Lachesis' staff. The Moirai don't control this exchange. They mark its progress. When Persephone returns, they don't cheer. Spring comes when the numbers line up, not when hearts grow hopeful. The connection runs deeper. While the Moirai handled seasons turning, the fates handled lives turning. The same parentage, different departments. The Moirai's autumn leaves mirror the Moirai's falling threads. Both are sheds. Both are necessary. Farmers knew this best. They sacrificed to the Moirai at planting and harvest, leaving offerings where fields met forests. Not just prayers for good crops, acknowledgements that time and fate shared roots. A bad season wasn't punishment. It was the loom's tension adjusting. The Moirai didn't cause droughts. They revealed where the pattern had worn thin. The Orphic hymns treat them similarly. Both Moirai and Moirai receive verses, but the requests differ. Together, they keep the world turning at the proper pace. Not too fast, not too slow. The balance feels like nature, but it's really bureaucracy. The universe's paperwork gets filed on schedule. Their tools reflect this. The Moirai carry wreaths, symbols of cycles completing. The Moirai hold spindle, rod and shears, instruments of linear progression. At first glance, they conflict. Look closer. A spindle must turn to spin. A rod measures the thread that turning produces. Even straight lines rely on circles. The Moirai ensure the fates' tools have something to work with. Persephone's myth shows the collaboration clearly. When Hades takes her, the fates don't object. They check the ledger. Her thread hasn't reached its end, but the pattern requires absence. It's logistical. The loom needs empty spaces as much as full ones. Winter isn't punishment. It's negative space in the weaving. This explains why their festivals aligned with solstices. The longest day wasn't celebration. It was accounting. The fates noted how human threads responded. Some frayed in heat, others strengthened. Both reactions fed back into the pattern. The dance wasn't symbolic, it was functional. Each season asks different questions of your thread. Summer, can you endure brightness? Winter, will you survive the lack? Spring requires flexibility. Autumn demands letting go. Your answers don't extend your life. They deepen it. Athens celebrated the Moirai with floral competitions, crowning whoever grew the most vibrant blooms. Not just pageantry, a reminder that beauty has seasons too. The fates attended these festivals silently. They couldn't promise the winners longer lives, only that their threads would include this moment of color. Temporary, they brought her message to the loom. The Moirai consulted the threads. Compromise was reached, but only within the existing pattern. 6 months, no more, no less. The Moirai enforced the ruling, not because they agreed, but because timing falls under their jurisdiction. Modern life misses this connection. The fates determined who got which energies. Your own life reflects this. Childhood summers stretch because the Moirai pace them differently. Middle years accelerate as patterns stabilize. Old age resembles winter, not in coldness, but in economy. Each movement purposeful, each hour accounted for. The fates set the length. The Moirai set the tempo. Evidence lingers in language. Harvest originally meant the season, not the act. Spring implied movement before it meant a time of year. The words knew their origins. Seasons don't just happen, They travel. The Moirai guide them. The fates determine who they pass along the way. Watch the trees next autumn. When leaves turn gold, it's not decay. It's the Moirai, notifying the Moirai that another cycle nears completion. Some threads will thicken for winter. Others will snap. The sisters don't mourn or celebrate. They adjust the loom and continue weaving. This changes how we view endings. Death isn't winter. It's the moment the Moirai stop counting your seasons. The fates handle the rest. The pattern continues. Always has. Always will. Just one strand in an endless repeating design. Now picture the loom at solstice. The Moirai stand to one side, tracking the sun's arc. The Moirai work silently, matching thread lengths to available light. No conflict, just coordination. Neither leads. Neither leads. Neither follows. They just move together through the necessity of what comes next. Your place in this might feel small. It's not. Every life adjusts the pattern slightly. A thread woven in summer affects autumn's tension. A cut in winter changes spring's beginnings. The details accumulate. The design evolves. Not quickly, but inevitably. The sisters don't explain their work, just participation. Notice how this feels in your body, the way winter makes you sleepy, how summer energizes. These aren't moods. They're the Moirai whispering to your threads, reminding them what season it is. Now imagine covering a sundial with your hand. The shadow disappears, but time continues. The Moirai don't stop counting. The Moirai don't stop measuring. Your attempt to hide changes nothing. The pattern continues around you. Better to lift your palm. Feel the light. Let the season move through you as intended. The dance never stops. Not for anyone. Not even for the dancers. The best we can do is notice when the music shifts and adjust our steps accordingly. Your life's thread is already spun, measured, and waiting for the shears. But here's the secret. The space between those fixed points belongs to you. The Greeks called this meros and moros. Your allotted portion and inevitable doom. But what they didn't say outright was how much the thread bends in between. Achilles knew this. The fates gave him two options: live long and forgotten, or die young and gloriously. They didn't choose for him. His decision. Heroes like him proved fate wasn't a prison. It was more like a river. You can't change where it ends, but you choose how to swim. Everyday choices matter too. When Alcestis traded her life for her husband's, the fates didn't stop her. They allowed the exchange because self-sacrifice fit the pattern. The thread adjusted, but the overall design held. Your small decisions work the same way. The job you take, the words you speak, the risks you avoid. None rewrite destiny, but each one tightens or loosens the weave. The Stoics claimed we control nothing but our reactions. The Epicureans insisted chance played a role, but the myths suggest a middle ground. Fate sets the boundaries, but we furnish the space inside them. Like actors given a script with room to improvise. The ending stays the same. The performance can surprise. The proof lingers in language. Isar, Apollo must serve as the god of prophecy. But how he delivers those prophecies changes everything. A vague warning here, a clear sign there. The role was fixed. The performance wasn't. Think of your life as embroidery. The fates supply the outline. Birth, growth, decline, end. Some are bold and messy. others precise and careful. The overall shape was always there. But the texture? This explains why Clotho spins but doesn't straighten. Why Lachesis measures but doesn't judge. Why Atropos cuts but doesn't judge. Why Atropos cuts but doesn't choose where. Their tools handle the structure. Ours handle the details. A hero isn't heroic because they avoid fate. They're heroic because of how they meet it. Modern psychology echoes this. Genes load the gun. Environment pulls the trigger. But you aim. The fates would nod at that. Your DNA is the thread. Your choices are the tension. The final pattern needs both. So when you face a decision today, remember the loom. Not to frighten you, but to free you. Now consider how these choices ripple beyond you. The same threads that bind you also connect you to family, to history, to stories not yet told. The pattern continues. Genetic testing companies promise to reveal your biological destiny, mapping out disease risks and ancestral roots before you're old enough to question it. That report isn't just data. It's Clotho's spindle in spreadsheet form. Your thread's raw material quantified. The DNA doesn't decide your life, but it sets the parameters. Like inheriting your grandmother's weak eyesight or your father's sturdy bones. The Greeks would nod at this. They knew some things get woven in at the start. When your phone suggests a route home, it's measuring your thread's likely path. Credit scores, targeted ads, even Netflix recommendations. All modern versions of the measuring rod. They don't control you. They anticipate you. The system knows most people take the highway at 5 p.m., just as the fates knew most heroes would fall to hubris. The patterns repeat because human nature hasn't changed. Only the tools have. Psychological determinism plays Atropos's role. Studies show childhood trauma literally shortens telomeres. Those tiny caps on DNA that determine cellular aging. Early abuse can cut decades off a life just as surely as the shears. We've found ways to dull the blades, not stop them, but make them hesitate. The Greeks would call this bargaining with the fates. We call it behavioral science. Astrology apps are the new oracles. People check daily horoscopes like ancient Greeks consulted Delphi, searching for clues in planetary alignments instead of burnt offerings. The language changed, but the hunger didn't. We still want to believe. Someone, something, has mapped the invisible threads, that if we read carefully enough, we'll spot the pattern before it tightens around us. Insurance companies act as mortal fates now. They calculate life expectancy down to decimal points, setting premiums based on how your thread compares to others. Smokers pay more because their fibers burn faster. Marathon runners get discounts, their strands stretch farther. Actuarial tables are just communal tapestries showing where most threads snap. No one calls it destiny. They call it risk assessment. Algorithms weave connections between people, pulling some threads tight while leaving others slack. That old friend who suddenly appears in your feed? We call it coincidence. The Greeks knew better. They'd recognize these as tiny interventions. Digital versions of the gods nudging heroes toward crossroads. Modern medicine fights Atropos directly. Ventilators stall the shears. Chemotherapy dulls them. We've added years to the average thread, but the cut still comes. The difference now is we see it approaching. Genetic tests can predict Alzheimer's decades before symptoms. Scans spot tumors when they're still small enough to remove. This knowledge changes how we live, not how long. That's the real shift. We've traded blind destiny for illuminated countdowns. The quantified self-movement takes it further. Fitness trackers log every heartbeat, turning life into data points. Sleep monitors chart rest cycles like oracles reading entrails. We've become archivists of our own threads, documenting each fray and kink. The fates must find this amusing. Mortals always tried to cheat them. Now we just take better notes while failing. Criminal justice shows where the system falters. Judges hand down sentences based on risk assessment, algorithms that claim to predict recidivism. These digital Lachesis rods often mismeasure, especially for minorities. The threads get cut prematurely, not by divine shears, but by biased code. Here, the ancient model feels fairer. At least the Moirai didn't discriminate by zip code. Climate change is the ultimate modern fate, not individual, but collective. The entire tapestry warming, threads combusting from the edges inward. Scientists play Cassandra, warning of coming shears no one heeds. The fates never dealt with extinction events. Their loom assumed the weavers would endure. Yet some patterns hold. People still leave offerings, though now they're GoFundMe pages instead of honeycakes at shrines. We still seek signs, whether in tea leaves or mistress scans. The language changed, the longing didn't. We know more about our threads than any generation before us. That knowledge hasn't made us freer, just more anxious. The Greeks had an advantage. Their fates were characters, stern but knowable. Our versions hide behind corporate logos and terms of service agreements. At least Clotho's face appeared on vases. Google's algorithm has no face at all. It gives shape to forces we feel but can't name. When your genes predispose you to cancer, it's easier to picture Clotho's spindle than a double helix. When the layoff notice comes, kinder to imagine Lachesis' rod than an HR spreadsheet. And when the end approaches, however it comes, there's comfort in visualizing Atropos' shears instead of a flatlining monitor. The truth is, we never stopped believing. We just outsourced the magic, medical. Charts for cutting. The tools got sharper. The hands holding them stayed human. So the next time your phone pings with a memory from 5 years ago, pause. The fates never left. They just learned to code the genes you inherited. That's Clotho's spin, the choices you make, Lachesis' adjustments, the time you have left, Atropos' unfinished business. The pattern hasn't changed, only the loom's design. We've added lights to the workshop. The shadows still stretch the same way. Picture your life as a single thread in the Moirai's loom. Right now, somewhere between Clotho's spindle and Atropos' shears, your strand is being woven into patterns you can't fully see. But here's what the myths teach us. The spaces between those fixed points are yours to shape. The fates may set the length, but only you determine the texture. Achilles faced this truth when he chose between a long, quiet life or a short, glorious one. His thread was already measured. The fates told him so. But the quality of those years, that was his decision. Most of us won't wrestle with such epic choices, but we face small aversions daily. The job we accept or reject. The kindness we show or withhold. These moments don't alter fate's boundaries, but they change how the cloth feels against the skin. Consider Alcestis stepping forward to die for her husband. The Moirai allowed the exchange because it fit the pattern, not because they were moved by love. Her sacrifice didn't break the rules. It revealed them. There's freedom in realizing this. You can't avoid all suffering, but you can choose which sufferings matter. Some threads are meant to fray so others stay strong. Your modern life still follows this ancient logic. When you scroll through job listings or swipe through dating apps, you're not fighting destiny. You're exploring its contours. The algorithm might suggest, but you decide. Trauma may have shortened your telomeres, literal threads inside your cells. But healing can slow that unraveling. We've become skilled at dulling Atropos' shears without pretending they don't exist. The Greeks would recognize this as wisdom, not defiance. Even heroes knew when to fight the fates and when to work within their design. Here's the secret hidden in the myths. Acceptance isn't surrender. When Oedipus learned his terrible fate, he ran straight toward it. His tragedy wasn't the prophecy. It was believing he could outsmart it. The healthiest response lies between resistance and resignation. That co-worker you encouraged yesterday might inspire someone else tomorrow. Your small choice becomes part of their pattern too. The loom accounts for these ripples. The question isn't whether your life follows a design. It's what you'll embroider within that framework. Your thread has already been spun. The colors you add are entirely your own. Before we conclude, tell me in the comments. When you imagine your life's thread, where do you feel the most texture? Which choices seem to shimmer brighter in the weave? If reflecting on myths brings you clarity, consider subscribing for more guided journeys through ancient wisdom. Now, the loom shifts. The final pattern emerges. The Moirai show us a truth both simple and profound. Beginnings and endings are set, but the weaving between them belongs to us. Like threads crossing in their loom, our choices create patterns no one could predict. Think of Achilles choosing glory, Alcestis offering her life. Each decision changed the fabric without breaking the weave. Now picture your own thread in that tapestry. What colors would it hold? Which intersections made it stronger? Tell me in the comments. If these quiet myths bring you comfort, consider subscribing for more bedtime stories from the ancient world. The loom never stops, neither do its lessons.